One of the biggest and most contentious parts of the budget is traditionally education spending. That is one of the topics that is still being debated down at the Capitol. Joining me from the Capitol tonight to give us an update on where things stand is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, Senator John Flanagan. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So over the weekend, I participated in a panel with you for the State School Boards Association, and you spoke rather strongly, I thought, to these folks who are school board members from across the state who were all coming and saying, we need more money, we need more money. And I think I had it right when I interpreted your comments as, there is no more money really, so get used to it.
Listen, that is a bone of contention. I tell people very clearly that there's about $900 million in new money. That's about a 4.5% increase. It's the single largest growth area in the entire budget. So we have a fiscal obligation, given the economic realities that we're dealing with, to work within those parameters. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect people to understand that, acknowledge it, and help us do that. Now, we are pleased with the governor's overall number. I don't agree with the distribution of that, and that's where we'll have a lot of the debate. But $900 million is not an insignificant amount of money, and if more money were available, we would probably be having different types of discussions. But our obligation now is to find something that's equitable for, frankly, all communities across the state.
Do you think, though, that the districts are correct in saying they need more money? I mean, if there was more money, we'd be having a different conversation. That's what you said. There are one person after another stood up at the microphone at this event that we were at and said, we're about to be insolvent. We are insolvent. We're facing insolvency, which means essentially they're going broke. They can't pay their bills. People come and tell me that all the time. When they say we need more, do you say maybe you do? I acknowledge that you do, but I can't give you more? Or do you think that they don't, in fact, need more?
No. I want to be very clear about something. Last year there was a $750 million increase. This year it's going to be about $900 million. That's over $1.6 billion in 2 years,
right.
And we are moving in the right direction. And if you look at what the state has done, we've cut spending in many other areas. And not only have we done that, we've kept state spending down overall to live within what is really a spending cap of the state of New York, even though it's not legally imposed. So I don't quickly go out there and say there shouldn't be any more money. I just don't want to mislead people. And people who go around saying there's going to be $400 or $500 million more are, I think, just not paying attention, or they're divorced from reality. And if you look at the governor's proposal, he left some latitude. $203 million in what was really fiscal stabilization grants.
Right.
We're going to take that money and drive that back to districts. We're talking about using some of the competitive grant money, which in an abstract way, no one would disagree with the value of some of the things that are being advanced. But you have to look and say, in a year like this, when school districts are having a tough time, that $75 million in competitive grants, while laudable, should probably be redirected. So I believe we are making a yeoman-like effort to address the needs of school districts in some type of equitable distribution, but recognizing that there's not an unlimited pot of money.
So, okay, but the question, as you already said, is how are you going to reallocate it? You know, again, for example, we were participating on this panel with Assemblywoman Addie Russell, who's from the North Country, and she, of course, wants to see it go to rural schools, and she's pushing for an overhaul in the funding formula, the base formula, and how the state determines how it allocates this money. You're from Long Island. You know, most upstaters think Long Island, you know, gets more than it should, in part because of the political makeup in the Senate, where you have the Long Island Nine, and of course the GOP leader, Dean Skelos, is from Long Island. So how are you in the Assembly going to come to terms on that? And can you actually do it by Friday?
Listen, ultimately every year we end up coming to a compromise, and I don't see this year being any different. I'm not going to apologize for advocating for my own schools, and nor am I going to apologize for advocating for schools who are not in the community that I live in and represent. I've traveled all around the state. I've been up to virtually all of my colleagues' districts. I've listened to rural schools, urban schools, suburban schools, poor schools, wealthy schools, and everybody feels like they need help. Our obligation is to figure out how to do that. But you did mention the overhaul of the formula, and Assemblywoman Russell has a bill that we actually had modeled by the State Education Department to see what it would do, and it is adverse to the interests of upstate New York. What they're talking about would be new funding in foundation aid. It would double it from roughly, well, more than double it, from now $15 billion up to $34 billion immediately. it would spend 60% of the increase in the city of New York. It would lower the overall share of education aid to districts upstate. And trust me, I pay attention to details. I check this out. I want to give money to poor rural districts. I want to help find money for average needs districts. But a lot of times it's like threading a needle. So when you talk about overhauling the formula, you have to be careful in terms of what you're advocating. And again, we checked this with the State Education Department, an independent review. That bill is not particularly helpful to the interests of upstate, and it really, I think, alters the distribution in a way that would have an adverse impact on kids all across the state. But for the right now, we're trying to figure out how do you deal with issues like high tax aid. High tax aid, the governor put that in his budget. With everything else he did in education, that's the only real area where it's a true cut. The GEA restoration, everybody gets a little, some get a lot more, but high tax aid affects 40 counties, it affects Democrats and Republicans, it affects many districts, it's well over 200 districts, and the governor's proposal, that gives about 65 districts either more money or new money that they heretofore had not gotten. So there's a lot of issues involving high tax aid alone before you get to the other parts of the distribution.
And just to be clear, you do think that you in fact can deal with all these issues, education, etc., by Friday?
I do.
You do.
I believe, well, listen, Friday, I think that would be a goal. The idea is to try and have bills in print so that we can pass the budget by the 21st.
Yeah. And
if there's goodwill and there's leadership and compromise, there's no reason we can't get that done in a timely fashion.
Okay.
It's not going to be easy, but there's no reason we can't get it done.
Okay, well, part of the reason why it's not easy is because you guys are in this uncharted territory where you have a power-sharing deal with the Independent Democratic Conference, those 5 breakaway Democrats. I'm still not entirely clear where everybody is on minimum wage, just to sort of turn the corner a little bit onto a different issue. Where is your conference on minimum wage?
Well, before I talk about the minimum wage, I think it's very important to recognize, and somehow I'm still confused by this, you have Democrats and Republicans working together. The Senate one-house budget proposal is a bipartisan effort, a product of Democrats and Republicans working together from all parts of the state, and yet people question that and they think there's something inherently wrong with that. I don't think that's appropriate at all. We are trying to act like leaders. We're trying to put forth budget proposals, and it's a compromise. On a minimum wage, I look at it in a couple of very basic ways, and I'm going to tell you a quick story. I had an owner of a bowling alley come in today. He has a bowling lane in my area and Senator Skelos' area, and he talked about the minimum wage. He obviously cares deeply about his employees. He told me if this goes through, he has a staff of 70 between the 2 facilities. He'll have to lay off at least 8 people. Now, here's someone who has long-term employees. He gives them benefits. He gives them a 401k. He does a lot of work, and he wants to retain people, but he said this is going to have a real adverse impact on him. What we've advanced is basically enhancements in tax credits that would help drive money into middle-class people's pockets. And I think we've taken a more prudent approach, at least for the time initially, in saying if we're going to be talking about what we're doing with individuals, we are really missing the boat if we don't do something for small businesses. And we have a multifaceted plan that I think addresses every community across the state of New York, because ultimately, no matter whether it's health, environment, transportation, parks and recreation, if we don't have jobs, if we don't stimulate economic development, if we don't provide incentives for employers to hire employees, the minimum wage is going to become a futile discussion.
Okay.
There are a lot of things that we need to do. If anything like that happens, it's got to be done in conjunction with many other things, including massive regulatory reform as well.
Okay. How likely is it that minimum wage will be in the final product?
Oh, Liz, you know what? I'll tell you what. I will let you look at my crystal ball when I get to look at the one you have. And I'm not trying to be cute. It's just that's an area where there's going to be a tremendous amount of discussion, as you know, and there has been already. But we need to go back to, again, economic development. What are we doing? How are we investing in education? What are we doing in health care? Are we living within our means as a state in terms of a spending cap? How are we going to make sure that money for Sandy victims gets properly distributed? So I'm not dismissive of the minimum wage whatsoever. It's an important area. It's worthy of discussion. But there are many other things that should be at the top of our agenda. And for me, of course, chairing the Education Committee, how we distribute the money and how we move around what the governor has originally presented to us is a hugely significant issue.
I want to ask you, we're almost out of time. I want to go just a little bit long because I do want to ask you this question. In the Senate Republican IDC proposal, there was what was described or seen by some as defunding of the SAFE Act. Was that an effort to get around the SAFE Act because repealing it is probably not going to happen?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. There are a lot of people who are talking about that both in the halls of Albany and outside. And I believe that whether it happens in the budget or outside the budget, there will be some type of modification or amendment to the SAFE Act, and that will include discussions about the funding and the implementation. I think there is some concern at the time that the bill was passed that it would not have that significant a cost to the state of New York. So to see that in there, I think raised everybody's eyebrows. But that issue, there will be something that will happen. I can't tell you exactly when, but I believe there will be modifications, and they're based on valid points have been raised, concerns on all sides, some on the mental health side, some on the sportsman side, and that issue is certainly not going to happen overnight or change overnight. But again, you know, you raise a valid point. There are many things in the budget that are going to consume time. For me, of course, maybe I'm a one-note Johnny, I'm going back. We have to find out how we're going to take care of education,
right.
And I'll just add that no matter whether you live in Plattsburgh or Utica or Chautauqua or Binghamton or Long Island or Westchester or Rockland, we have an obligation to properly fund education so that every kid has a fair opportunity for a good quality education.
Senator, remind me, how did you vote on the SAFE Act again?
I voted yes.
Are you sorry?
No, I'm not.
Okay, because I have seen some of, at least one of your colleagues, Phil Boyle, who is from Long Island, has put forth, he said he was sorry, I think, for his vote. So there's a lot of people who are second-guessing themselves, it looks like to me.
Liz, I'm going to tell you, I think there are some very strong components of that legislation that we would not have seen otherwise. The privacy provisions, the increases in penalties for the criminal possession and illegal use of guns, the mental health provisions. I believe that there were many, many positive efforts made to amend the original proposal from something that was far more draconian to something that a lot of people could agree on. And I think this is characteristic of any major legislation. You're always going to find someone who is going to find fault with it. I stand by my vote, and I believe that we worked hard, and we can recognize the potential for some changes, which I think will occur certainly sometime during this session. Okay, well, obviously we're following that one. People are very interested. Senator, I appreciate your time because I know it's very busy. I think there's a conference committee tomorrow on education, 11:30 a.m. Hopefully we will be there. And again, thanks for your time. All right, great. Thank you.